Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Borderlands 4 talk. We're super close to launch now, and so I want to talk about a lot of the bigger aspects of the game, some of its future, key mechanics for the longer term aspects, and yeah, some of the newer stuff that will matter. But it comes from the perspective of someone who's actually played the game. I've been lucky enough to have earlier access, but obviously we're still under careful restrictions on what we can show or say, so I'll be largely covering all the publicly available information on these topics, and adding what I can say or maybe even show from my own gameplay. So let's get into it. First up, we're going to cover the pretty extensive endgame options that they've now talked about more publicly. But if you're unaware, they want to maintain BL4's post-launch life through live events, new free content, and longer-term progression systems. It's an active endgame. They pose this largely as weekly events where multiple things change to challenge you to something really hard with great, reliable rewards behind it. This is alongside the longer term progression stuff that you'll probably work on in your own time, like working on new specialization tree points or your higher Ultimate Vault Hunter mode levels. So there's a lot going on here, let's cover all of it. First up, the Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, which will greatly impact your ability to access firmware and other endgame system. But in short, endgame's going to be about achieving the Ultimate Vault Hunter, the strongest, most monstrous version you can make. Naturally, to do that, we'll need access to the best gear, to fully unlock all our passives, and have a focused playstyle that basically forms a classic build. For that, we're going to be doing a variety of stuff. Let's start with the Ultimate Vault Hunter mode itself. This was a popular community feature in Borderlands 3. So obviously they brought it back with its popularity, but with some changes. It's going to be unlocked after you complete the campaign the first time. So as you can see, we're looking at two game types here. We have the second one that starts at level 30, and it sets you off with a few quick tutorial missions to get you comfortable, unlocking Vault Hunter difficulty 1. But to unlock further difficulties, you need to complete their Ultimate Vault Hunter challenges, where you're set against specific enemies, which if you beat, you'll eventually get access to the unique wildcard mission. Their weekly wildcard mission is the new aspect of this, in which you're able to target a specific enemy or location, farm for one specific legendary that week. So each week the mission changes, but that mission features something special, like enemies with specific traits that add a lot of extra challenge compared to normal. But if you do beat it, you're guaranteed a legendary for your efforts, which is a big deal. And through that, hopefully access specific kinds of builds that get you to that better strength. But through this Vault Hunter mode and the higher levels of it, you access firmware. This is their first attempt at gear sets in Borderlands. So it's a new addition only found on non-weapon gear, which means shields, rep gear, your Ordinance slot, the enhanced mods, class mods, those 5 slots are where you can find firmware as an extra bonus. And you try to combine firmware types to complete a set. You need 3 pieces of the same firmware set to complete that, but 1 piece still gives you bonuses, it's just a weaker version. So let's look at an example of that. They show Godkiller here. Damage dealt to badass enemies, your elites, it's increased by 10% at level 1. At level 2, damage taken from these targets, that's 10% less. But then, at level 3 it's a big jump. On killing a badass, your damage dealt overall will be increased by 20% for 60 seconds, which is obviously a hefty bonus. So obviously the value of having a full set, all 3 pieces, is fantastic. But since you have 5 slots to work with, you're only going to be able to achieve that for 1 kind of firmware. Then you might choose 2 other kinds at level 1 or 1 other kind at level 2 based on the passives that matter for your build. We have seen an example of something called a transfer machine that helps with that, where it seems like you're destroying some gear with whatever firmware it has to put onto a new piece of gear instead. So when you find a new piece of gear that has better bonuses or passives or whatever that you care about, you can still bring a firmware to that matches what you're aiming for. Either way, exclusive firmware will only be found in those higher difficulties, so the harder you make everything, the better your firmware potential. Next we have specializations then. At endgame we're unlocking an entirely new skill tree that's separate from the Vault Hunter that you're playing. These are also going to be unlocked after the campaign, and through this you kind of get to keep leveling up and spend the points on this new tree. As they said, this will replace Guardian ranks if you're familiar with that system, and while these are certainly potent passive perks, there's these new socketable behaviors that they've referenced. For the passives, we see one example is under the first level of Survivor. Sturdy stuff means when you go down and you're in fight for your life, that downed effect lasts a lot longer if you don't move around. But when you do trigger a second wind when in that state, you get up fully healed instead, which is a nice bonus. For the socket spaces, they say that 4 slots are possible when you're fully leveled up, But the only example we saw of one of these special sockets was from Gadgeteer here. It provided Ordinance cooldown reduction and started at just 1% of that. Maybe this is something you can heavily invest in to massively reduce the cooldown, which would be great in this example if your build was all about Ordinance effects. They mentioned a couple other options like contracts, which do come into the game right at the start. Say you reach your first base, you can pick up your bounties as they were, providing you with random targets to go hunt, or mini missions where you go pick up a thing and bring it back, or find a secret, little goals where you get a nice pile of XP and some specific bonuses. However, in the endgame, these will also start to reward you with Iridium, which is a very important currency for the endgame, used for a bunch of stuff like respeccing your specializations, or leaning into the encore versions of bosses. So, Moxxi's big encore machine. They highlighted the encore machine is in the game, and this is basically your ability to respawn a boss you've just killed so you can run it again. This is because bosses have unique pools of loot, and so if you want X or Y legendary, you're gonna have to go kill one specific boss and hope it drops, that kind of thing. The encore machine means you don't have to go kill it, then reload the save, then try again. It's just a machine that spawns after the first kill, you spend some resources, it spawns the bosses again, you get to try a lot smoother in this way. The endgame upgraded version of this is called the big version of the encore machine. Each week, there'll be one big version at a specific boss location, and so by using Iridium, you can spawn this harder version of a boss than normal, which has much better odds for their specific loot pool, which would be great if it's one you care about. Outside of that, there are still raid bosses. A raid boss or level is just one that you go through pretty quick and it leads to a special boss encounter at the end. These are tagged as invincible bosses. They're not invincible, but they are extremely difficult to kill because they have a massive health pool and their damage output's ridiculous. And as the devs put it, it's going to be one of the best sources of loot in the game. By killing these, you'll also unlock more Ultimate Vault Hunter difficulties because it's going to be one of the challenges to do that. So well worth the effort. It's a lot to think about. Sounds good on paper, but what about the future of the game outside of that? Let's look at the roadmap and then consider what it tells us. As you can see, we know about quarter 4 in 2025 and quarter 1 in 2026, and then what will come long after that. Quarter 4 is basically like, your October, November, December, and then we have the first 3 months of 2026 for quarter 1 for that. So coming pretty much immediately or imminently, we have the launch of the game on September 12th, and then shortly after that we're going to get some free content in what they call a mini-event, Horrors of Kairos, where there will be a new legendary weapons, new cosmetics, and new weather variants. Also within this period, they're going to launch the first bounty pack, which is something that does come with the Deluxe and Super Deluxe edition, but this just means new missions and bosses, new legendary gear again, a bunch of cosmetic stuff, and a new vehicle. The next thing that's going to come towards the end of quarter 4, maybe December or November, is Invincible Boss 1. They call this a high-level boss variant, an arena, with new legendary weapons and extra Ultimate Vault Hunter mode levels. Now, they've already said that invincible bosses, raid bosses are going to be in the game, but this is tagged as Invincible Boss 1. Could this mean that we're not going to have our first raid boss until this update comes in maybe November or December? Or is it just going to be the first new invincible boss that launches after the ones we currently have? We'll have to see, but it makes you wonder. But then we have quarter 1 in 2026, so January, February, March, that kind of period. We'll get the second bounty pack, which again is another sort of purchasable cosmetic stuff, but also new missions and bosses and new legendary gear, so I'm really interested to see what that really means. But with the free content at that period, we're also going to get a new rarity called Pearlescent. Maybe that'll be like the new highest rarity. And around this time, we're going to get our first story pack, Mad Ellie in the Vault of the Damned, which means new Vault Hunter, new main story, new map, a new zone in general, side missions, legendary gear, new cosmetics. It's basically the first DLC. And again, this comes in the Super Deluxe edition of Borderlands 4 if you got that. Otherwise, it'll probably be DLC. After quarter 1 then, we're going to have the future bounty packs, the next story pack, more invincible bosses, other stuff that they'll tell us more about when we get closer to that period. Overall then, it looks about what you'd expect, but I am wondering about Invincible Boss 1, and if that means we're not going to have an Invincible Boss, no raid, until that point. Here's another big one then. Let's talk about pre-order legendaries. This is a concept that has applied in the past, where basically the legendaries you got from pre-order didn't really matter. It was stuff you got pretty early, and you'd find better stuff before long. However, I was told about like a melee focused legendary that did exist that had some real impact, and that came from a pre-order, so you never know. In this case, they're definitely making it a bit more varied, where they're going to have different levels for each. So some are going to be level 1, some are going to be level 30, or even max level. Looking at the information they gave us, it says this. The level 1 legendary Maliwan SMG This will fire off spiraling projectiles that create a cone of death, and since it's a Maliwan weapon, that'll mean you can swap between element modes, which will be really useful initially when you don't have a lot of options for that, like shock for destroying shields, and that kind of thing. Then they list 2 legendaries that come at level 30. Firstly, we have a Ripper Grenade that teleports through nearby enemies multiple times, dishing out damage with each bounce, or the Torgue Ordinance, which unleashes a volley of high-speed rockets that ricochet in a union of Torgue and Jakobs tech. Sounds like a lot of AoE potential. Between those then, they sound like they're going to be really impactful at the periods you get them, so in the early game with that SMG, or in like the mid game with the level 30 grenades. But it's very reasonable to think we're going to power creep those in good time not long after. The final one is a max level legendary though, a Daedalus assault rifle, one of the new types. But anyway, this lists you land guaranteed critical hits on enemies at full health, with the chance to crit decreasingly proportionate to their dwindling health. So the more healthy a target is, the more you crit with them. But there are lots of bonuses to the concept of critting and landing a crit, so having a reliable way to do that could actually be useful even in the endgame. So, overall, it sounds like these pre-order ones are going to be particularly good. How will they be super long term? Hard to say. But initially, they're gonna be good, so they're really trying to encourage pre-order. Anyway, I just mentioned the whole new manufacturer thing, so we'll just mention it quickly. There's actually going to be 8 total manufacturer types in the game. Manufacturer types are just the whole, like, Jakobs weapons, Maliwan weapons. Like I said, with Maliwan, basically the idea is you can swap between different elements with a Maliwan weapon, which is obviously useful. You have, like, Torque, which are more about explosive ammos. The reason we have 8 now is because there's 3 new ones in Borderlands 4. First one that's new that is tying into the story a lot is the Order, which basically lets you charge up attacks and unleash a burst of a charge up version of that gun, just to be able to tap fire it. But yeah, the charge up's gonna be really potent. There's Ripper, which is all about fully automatic weapons, the idea of dumping mags really quick. Or Daedalus, which lets you use multiple ammo types, where Maliwan lets you use multiple element types. So yeah, a lot to consider there. But for a couple other things I want to mention, the open world itself is meant to be massive. This is something I'm obviously unable to talk to you guys about, but they have made it publicly available that there's going to be 4 main areas of play: the Fade Fields, Carcadia Burn, Terminus Range, and Dominion. The Fade Fields are like these wide, expansive green fields, whereas the Carcadian Burn is like a fractured desert. Terminus Range is like a very vertical, icy region, and Dominion is the large tower where a lot of the story centers around, with the main sort of villain. They've made it very clear that the world is massive in this case, introducing new stuff like the silos, which are basically bases you unlock for fast travel and otherwise, right? But it activates a balloon in that area, which allows you to go up into the air and without using any of your glider stamina, as it were, fly around from above, which will really help explore. They also showed the mount a little bit in some earlier gameplay, where you just pull out a mount at the press of a button, has its own health and stamina bar for boosting around, it's customizable, but obviously very important because it's a big world. On top of that, you have the new movement. So I just mentioned there's a glider, so when you jump in the air and you hold spacebar or whatever button, use your glider stamina and fly around in a very horizontal way. There's the double jump though to get up higher, or climb up stuff when you're mantling on ledges. There's a dash, which you can use when you're in midair, consuming half the glide stamina, but it moves you super quick at a short distance. It can completely change your momentum and direction, like when you're mid-gliding, and is unbelievably good when dealing with boss mechanics or dodging grenades and that kind of thing. There's also the grapple, which you can use to pull yourself up to ledges if there's something you can grapple to, but it can also grab things like explosive canisters and otherwise to throw at enemies. These are often tied to elements, which can be really useful. So this obviously will come into your general open world exploration, but will have big impact in mid-combat gameplay too. But yeah, that brings me to the end of this talk. For some final thoughts, I just want to let you guys know that it's generally a harder game than Borderlands has been in the past, certainly when it comes to Borderlands 3. They have made it a bit more rewarding with the difficulty modes, quite literally improving drops based on the difficulty you're on, which is awesome. But it does seem like, you know, playing on hard mode while you're doing the story will genuinely be difficult, which in my opinion is something the game definitely needs. And from everything we've talked about with the endgame, where they're giving us ridiculous challenges and invincible bosses as they call them, the harder Vault Hunter modes, challenge and difficulty for greater specific rewards if you're up for it, seems to be a key point of Borderlands 4, which I think is a really good thing. Very soon we'll be able to talk a lot more about it and you guys can finally dive in. So until then, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching, see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.